Hello and welcome to the Good Growth Podcast. On today's episode, we're discussing leadership and innovation, and in relation really to how this has been applied in motorsport in particular. Leadership in this case being leading a team to World Championship titles, and innovation within achieving this success within the only motorsport championship that uses solely electric cars, Formula E. So no one better to cover those topics with than with the team principal of the back-to-back world champions, DS TECHEETAH, Mark Preston. Welcome to you, Mark.
Hi there. Thank you for having me today.
We'll get into your Formula One and Formula E experience as we go along. I want to start by just asking really, so you've been involved in motor racing for pretty much all of your career, it seems. Where did that passion and interest for the sport come from initially?
My grandfather was a auto wrecker. I think in the UK we call them salvage merchants. From the sort of 20s onwards, 20s, 30s, 40s, we grew up around farms, around trucks and other mechanical systems. Let's say I got involved in on the farms of getting old trucks working, driving cars on the farm, etc. And when it came to deciding what I wanted to do in university, I was a bit of a car nut. I used to watch Bathurst 1000, which is the Australian race, a bit like Australia's Le Mans. I used to read car magazines all the time, and this is all just based off the back of being around cars, tractors, those kind of things. So I got involved quite early on. When I was at university, I did a fairly theoretical degree, and I think it was the second year, I decided to start looking at how I could do something practical. And I got involved with one of the race car manufacturers down there called Ball and Racing, who makes and still makes a Formula Ford racing car called a Spectrum. So I got involved in Formula Fords during my time at university.
So you grew up in Australia. Did motor racing bring you to the UK? And what were you, hoping to achieve from the move initially? What were your ambitions?
So we had a successful campaign in '96 in Formula Fords with our car, and a mechanic with a journalist came and saw me one night at a race in Sydney and said, "When do you turn 27?" And I said, in 3 months, I think it was. And they said, "Well, you know that if you want to go to England and work in Formula One, you should go before you're 27, because there's a program for people to go overseas and work." So actually, within about a month, I decided I was going to England, and I was coming for 2 weeks or 2 years. And more than 20 years later, I'm still here, having I came over and had about 10 job interviews with Formula One teams, and ended up with Arrows Grand Prix, which had just been bought by the owner of the company I worked for in Australia called Holden Special Vehicles. His name was Tom Walkinshaw, and he bought Arrows over here, and they had a job because I was a stress engineer, and which means working out how strong things are, calculations, part of the business. And they had a role for someone there, and so my 2 weeks were up, and I got a job, so I stayed. And I was going to think about staying for 2 years, but then lots of other things happened, and more than 20 years later, here I am still doing motor racing. And this is the center of motor racing in the world, I believe, because you've got all the Formula One teams, a number of Formula E teams, all sorts of technology around motorsports, all based around this what they call the Motorsport Valley area. I think it goes all the way from down near McLaren up to Northampton, where Mercedes high performance engines are.
So you touched on there how you started cutting your teeth in Formula One, joining Arrows in '96, and you also then went on to McLaren as well. At this stage, whilst you're with Arrows and McLaren, were you getting those ideas then to start forming your own team?
Yeah, when I was in Australia, I actually owned my own racing team. It was called Spectrum Racing Cars, and we came second in the championship just as I left, come to the UK, and I'd always wanted to start another team. And as I was finishing at McLaren, I went and did my MBA at Oxford, and that's when I spent all my time on the MBA looking at Formula One and business models around Formula One, and planning how we could start a Formula One team. And so actually, while I was doing the MBA, we had a plan, we had a number of people in place that we were talking to, and then along came Aguri Suzuki with Honda, Bridgestone, Takuma Sato, and they needed to start a Formula One team in a hurry. And we had a plan, and we knew who we'd hire and how we'd do it. And so we joined together, and we formed Super Aguri Formula One team with Honda, and that was one of the most crazy fun journeys you'll ever get to do. We started a Formula One team in 100 days. That was, most people didn't think we could do it. I'm not sure that we even thought we could do it really properly at the time, but we did. We worked every day, and it was known to man between sort of October and the first race. I think it was in March in Bahrain. So that was a pretty exciting adventure, and one that not many people get to experience, but certainly something I'm very glad I did.
It is an incredible achievement, that just getting on the grid within 100 days. How did you manage that? Like you say, you're working all hours of the sun, but practically that and logistically, that's it's some effort.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I look back now with my sort of MBA hat on and try to figure out what things did we learn, because often people get me to do presentations at things like Formula Student talks to teach some of the young engineers about starting racing teams in university. We really broke everything down into very, very, very tight sections, and I will say that often when you make a decision, you think, oh, I can put that off another day, I can put that off another day, and it won't impact my final result. However, in motor racing, the plane leaves without you, the race happens without you. So you have to make very pragmatic decisions. So every week we had decisions that we had to make that some people would say, oh my God, that's not a really great decision. But we said, no, on that day, we have to make a decision, right or wrong, we have to make a decision. If we don't, we won't get to the race. So there was some fairly crazy decisions we had to make along the way that some people would say were silly at the time, but we didn't do them, we wouldn't have got there at the time. So it was very pragmatic. They call it time boxing, where you sort of say, we'll break down the project into sections, but at the end of each little time box, that might be a week or it might be 2 weeks, you have to make a decision. At the end of that 2 weeks, it's too bad. You have to make a decision, whether it's for a sort of a certain type of wing. I think we had to choose radiators one time, I remember. We had to choose a new roll hoop because one had failed. We had to make decisions there and then and not wait. So it was quite an incredible experience, but it almost taught you that almost anything's possible. Sometimes you say anything's possible, time and money. We did sometimes have to spend more money than you would in order to get the job done. But we also realized that, some nights we'd go home and think that we've got an impossible problem. I don't know how we're going to solve this. And then at 5 a.m. the next morning, you'd wake up thinking, I know what the answer is. Going to work, everyone was already there. We figured out the problem. We moved on to the next one. And the next night you go home with the next impossible problem and come up with the answer. So sometimes you had to go home and just let your brain get out of it. And then in the morning, suddenly, oh, wait a minute, I think I know how we're going to do this.
It's quite a cool process. That, I mean, I guess you're that kind of time frame, and knowing that you have to be on the grid, Australian Grand Prix, first race of the season. The efficiency, I guess, in your decision making is streamlined so much.
It's incredibly fast, and determined.
Yeah. So that was your Formula One journey. You set up the Super Aguri team. And then you've moved on to Formula E, and you've been a part of Formula E since its inception. And for those listeners who aren't as familiar perhaps with Formula E, it, as I was saying earlier, is the only motorsport championship or single-seat motorsport championship that uses solely electric cars. It's essentially is it fair to say, a more modern version of Formula One in terms of the use of electric cars? Tell me, how different is Formula E from Formula One, and what makes it exciting in its own right?
One of the reasons I started to look, sadly, we had to close down Super Aguri when the last financial crash happened, and Honda pulled out of Formula One, so we had to close down the team. But I went and looked for what was the most relevant to the future, and I've got a sketch from 2009 when we were working with David Hunt, James Hunt's brother, about new ideas for racing in the future, and we'd sketched an electric race car, and most people thought we're a bit nuts. But the FIA had started looking at it as well. Alejandro, who won the project to do the total Formula E ecosystem, so we were starting to look at it. I helped a spin-out company of Oxford University called Oxford Yassa Motors do a lot of their business planning and those things in 2008. So I got interested in electric vehicles. What was the future? What was the predictions? When you think about it, that's 12 years ago, and that's a long time, really. But that's how long ago we were looking at electric vehicles, electric motors. What was the future? It took until 2014 to get to a point that we started Formula E. But even in those days, everybody thought we were crazy. And now it seems no one sort of believes us anymore when we say people really did think we were crazy. They really thought we were mad. And they thought I was mad enough starting a Formula One team, but starting a Formula Electric team seemed even crazier because, nobody was really interested in electric cars at that time. If you watched Top Gear at the time, if you remember, they had built this crazy car that was electric that they drove around Oxford at about 5 miles an hour, and it was really, terrible thing. But they were obviously having a joke there, taking the mickey. But that's what people thought about electric cars at that time. So when you think where we've got to since then, as I say, it's very hard to explain how crazy people thought we were. They think we're a lot less crazy now because we've got quite a lot of car companies in the series. It's gone from strength to strength. We won the championship last year against great competition from Nissan and Mercedes. So it's been a pretty exciting journey. And what I've enjoyed the most is that it's all about the future. I think that's really the main element. And to answer your question about how does it differ from Formula One, I mean, Formula One is faster, but we do a lot of different things. For example, we race over one day, so the drivers have a lot more pressure on them because they arrive in the morning. They only have one day to do practice, qualifying, race. Whereas in a more traditional race series, you would build up to it from the Friday through Saturday to the Sunday. So there's a lot of differences there. We race in city centres, so we've got tight, twisty tracks, downtowns. So there's a lot of differences, a lot of exciting differences, and a lot of ways of differentiating from Formula One. But as you know, Formula One is looking to the future as well. The way we store energy is with batteries, and that's how we transfer it or carry energy. A Formula One car carries energy in petrol, but there's a future is coming where it looks like there might be things like e-fuels, which are synthetic fuels, which come from hydrogen and other sources. So there's all sorts of exciting things coming up in all realms of racing, actually.
So, as you mentioned, the idea of racing electric cars was seen as a little bit crazy a few years ago. The sport is quickly expanding in terms of the number of teams, the number of races, the kind of reach that you're getting within the sport. How is it now doing that? Is it, how much of it do you think is natural just in terms of the world becoming more accustomed to electric vehicles, but also what do you think the sport is doing to increase that reach and interest?
Well, I think they say that a rising tide floats all boats. So timing is everything. So starting Formula E just at the right time when the world is taking a much closer look at sustainability. Obviously, because of COVID, that's been quite difficult. However, it has shown things like clean air. Many cities in the world that have never seen the sky really clearly now see the sky clearly because of the reduction in transportation. So there's all these factors that are happening alongside Formula E that are really making it interesting to a wider audience. You might have seen recently that we are now the first sport that's been accredited as net zero since its inception. And that's because of all of the projects that have been happening along the way to offset our carbon footprint. But the world is changing as well. So we are changing with the world. There's the obvious promotion. We're backed by DS automobiles. Their range is going electrified. So I drive now a DS3 electric. So as I drive cars, I tell more people about it. It's just this cumulative effect that's going on. The more people that see other people driving electric cars, we've now got 8 other car manufacturers that are competing against us. So they're also promoting their vehicles around the world. Rules are changing. As I say, the rising tide floats all boats. So you can sometimes tell you're in the right place when all the winds, the winds at your tail, all of those old sayings that mean, it's better to be the wind behind your back. All of those descriptions are true. So we're in the right place, right time, all those elements. Plus, it's an exciting sport to watch. We've got some of the most competitive drivers in motorsports that I've ever seen. Lots of great competitors, I say, like Mercedes, Nissan, Porsche, BMW, lots of great competitors. So it's an exciting place to be, and that's always the best place.
Let's talk about then your team, DS TECHEETAH, and you're saying that saying earlier that the team has won the last 2 team world championships, and a driver from your team's also won the last 3 drivers' championships, I believe. In your view, then, how do you go about building a team that are going to become world champions? What are you looking for in terms of not just the drivers, but mechanics, engineers, the whole team?
I suppose, after winning all these races, you may have seen that we won quite a lot of races in Berlin, where we had to do all the final races of this last season. It's a big team effort. We've got the best drivers. I think we've got the best powertrain. We've got the best engineers. We've got the best people in the background, commercial, admin. You have to have every element of a team working, because if someone doesn't pay the bills, then you can't do something. If the drivers don't drive fast, you can't win. If they don't give good feedback, then the engineers may have difficulty making them go faster. So you need to have all aspects. I think it's important to understand what people's strengths and weaknesses are. So I know sometimes I'm not the best person on detail, but I've got people in my team that are really good at detail. The same would be true of the drivers. They could probably see some areas where they're slightly weak in maybe, say, development, but we've got a great development driver in James Rossiter. So Jev can do amazing qualifying laps, so can Antonio. So that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and put all those things together and you create an amazing team.
And for you, what are your biggest challenges of being team principal?
I suppose now, from where I started when I first started in motor racing, I was much more of a specialist. But over the years, so I did stress analysis, which is working out how strong the cars are, as I said. I'm really into data and calculations, but I don't do that day to day anymore. I might ask the engineers some questions just to understand what we might need to buy, or what partnerships we might need to have with other companies. My job is to try and grow the team, grow its partnerships, so get great partners like DS Automobiles. I work very closely with them on the future. Partners like Efosec, who does charging systems, Male, who does e-mobility powertrains and other aspects of cooling and other things related to powertrains. Building a group of partners around us is a really one of my biggest jobs now. And then just helping everybody with the things that I've had experience of before. So I've been in motor racing for sort of 30 years or something like that. So I've made lots of mistakes along the way, and it's probably easier if people are willing to listen to say, look, I've done that before. It's always terrible when you say, when I was there, I did this thing, but maybe it's sometimes it's beneficial when you say, I had this problem before and this seemed to be the quick answer. So we've got a lot of experience on the team, but we've also got a lot of young engineers and others that are quite innovative. So having innovative people and encouraging them to be innovative and taking a level of risk when we can, and maybe less risk when we can't, but having a nice balance of risk and reward, having good people in every area, and everybody are hopefully understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Thanks. That's really good insight into the different mechanisms that you've got to balance, I guess, within the team as well. Looking ahead, what are your hopes then for the sport going forward as it grows, and your own personal ambitions? What else do you hope to achieve in the sport now that you are world champions?
Yeah, obviously we have to keep trying to go and win. Obviously, everybody's working really hard in the background to deliver more performance and more wins in the future. DS is bringing out a new powertrain in the next season, in the fifth race, as we move on through the season. So we're bringing new performance. I'm just fascinated with the future. I'm just always interested in what is the next thing. I'm driving my electric vehicle around now, trying to understand the similarities between how the drivers drive them on the racetrack and how I can drive them on the road. Just understanding, how electric vehicles work better and better all the time. I think there's some new exciting things coming up in the areas of energy, like hydrogen and the new hydrogen economy. That one interests me. I'm not sure how that'll interface with Formula E at the moment, potentially through, the ways we charge vehicles at the track, moving more hydrogen, other energy sources into the supply chain so that it's easier to charge where we travel around the world. And just generally looking at the future of technology, it's always really interesting. I have another company called Street Drone, which is in autonomous vehicles, and that's exciting as well because AI is fascinating, and how it can be applied to race cars is another step in the future.
Mark, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's a real whistle-stop talk, but a fascinating insight into your career in F1 and now FE. Thank you very much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.